Why of all things does the Torah compare us to a tree in the field? Is it purely metaphorical, or is there something deeper to this image? The pasuk in this week's parasha that says the man is the tree of the field. The Gemara asks, is a person a tree of the field? They explain, no, it's actually representing something. And because the pasuk tells us that the fruit-bearing tree you should eat from, you shouldn't cut it down. And yet it says about a non-fruit-bearing tree that you may cut it down in certain contexts. Says the Gemara, how do you reconcile both? You do, you don't cut it down. Says the Gemara, if a person is an appropriate, a dignified Talmud Chacham, then you should eat from their fruit, meaning, as Rashi tells us, that you should learn from such a person. And you shouldn't in any way cut down or harm such a person. But he's not an appropriate Talmud Chacham, then I say sashchis. Then you cut him down, which Rashi explains means surme or love v'koras. Right? You move away from him, stay away from him. So we need to understand. The Gemara's question is, is a person a tree of the field? The fact that the Gemara is asking, is a person a tree of the field, implies that we don't understand this pasuk just to mean that the tree is a metaphor for one or a number of qualities of the human being. Because if the pasuk did only intend to say that there are certain qualities that humans have which are similar to the qualities of a fruit tree, then you would never have the question, is a human a tree of the field? Because you say, well, in these respects, a person is like a tree of the field. Rather, the implication of the question is that the implication of the question is that we are to understand from the Torah that a human being is a tree of the field. In other words, that expression, that designation of a tree expresses not only certain qualities or side elements of the human being, somehow the tree of the field is supposed to represent and encapsulate everything about what a human being is. Here's further evidence to the fact that a person is a tree of the field, that we humans don't say Tachnun on the 15th of Shvat, which is the Rosh Hashanah for trees. What's the connection? We specifically eat fruit on Chamishas B'Shvat. And the basis for doing all these things is this pasuk that says, man is the tree of the field. Because if we believe that a tree is just supposed to be a metaphoric representation of a human being or certain characteristics of the human being, that would not be a good enough reason why the Rosh Hashanah for trees should be a day that is celebrated by us, Tachnun and certain rituals, right, to eat the fruits. So that's further proof to the fact that when the pasuk says that the human is a tree of the field, we're saying that the human is the tree. Therefore, the beginning of the year of the cycle of trees is linked to humans. So what is it about a human being that is absolutely encapsulated by the tree of the field? So the whole thing doesn't seem to make sense. If we're asking the question, how is a human the tree of the field? How does the Gemara actually address this question? Because the Gemara is the one who said, is the human a tree? And then explains, not by showing us how we are a tree, but speaking about a specific quality. That if a person is an appropriate Talmud Chacham, you should be learning from them. That doesn't answer the question. Surely that has all of the problems that we've raised, which is it's a metaphor. The tree is a metaphor, and we learn from it what it represents in human experience. And it's only talking about a particular quality, the quality of teaching. Which means that the Gemara's original question remains, because of the fact that there's this trait in humans which is similar to the trait of the trees. It's appropriate to call a person a tree of the field? We haven't answered the question. Second of all, how does it make any sense to describe a human who is the highest of the four life forms, the medaber, the one who has the capacity to communicate, to speak, to describe that person as what's so great about you? You're a tree of the field. Which is a far more limited kind of being, the tzomech, which grows, but doesn't have the sophistication of a human being. Okay, obviously a human being has certain parts of the human which are like the tree, in other words, that they grow. Like, for example, your hair is constantly growing, your nails are constantly growing, we are constantly growing. So we have a tzomech element to us. Still, if that's what we're looking at, that we grow like plants grow, well, then we can say we're alive with the independent living that an animal has. So maybe you should compare us rather to animals. And besides which, the main thing is, the greatness of a human is not that we grow. We share that with animals, we share that with plants. It's not what makes us unique. So why then would we say that the human is the tree of the field? That seems to be limiting and degrading the qualities that we have, the greatness that we have. So why the link between a human specifically to a tree? So what we obviously then have to do is identify something that is very unique and special about the plant kingdom that does not exist in the animal or the human kingdom. What is that uniqueness? Plants do not conceal their true source of life. And the plant is constantly, because of its root system, linked to and bound with its source of life. The energy within the ground that allows it to continue to grow, it is always plugged in. And if you detach a plant from the earth, it will die. That's unique to the plant kingdom. When you're dealing with animals or humans, we do not see that you have to have an umbilical cord that links you to your source of life in order to live as an animal or as a human. We roam. We have freedom of movement. We can travel many, many miles from our point of origin. We're not linked specifically to the ground. Even though we were produced out of the ground originally at the time of creation, we have no physical attachment to the ground during the course of our lifetime, in fact, even in our births. Plus, we, once we're born, do not have to remain connected to the mother that birthed us. We become independent beings. Even the way that we feed, unlike a plant needs to get its nutrients from the ground. If the root system is not healthy, it doesn't get its nutrients and it cannot survive. Whereas a human and an animal, we can move all over the place in order to find food, and perhaps all kinds of different types of food, certainly in the human experience, that has nothing to do with our original point of origin. Therefore, the uniqueness of the tzomech, the plant kingdom, is that it is always linked to the source of its original existence and its sustainable life. Now, you'd say, but there is something in the animal kingdom that is similar. We do find something similar with fish. In order for fish to survive, they have to be living inside the water, which is the source of their life. And it's suicidal for them to leave the water. In fact, you could argue that the link between the fish and its life source is even greater than the plant and its life source, because the plant grows out of the ground, which is its source of life, and has to be anchored with its roots, whereas the fish constantly lives completely within its source of life. So maybe fish are even more advanced in this respect than plants are. But that's exactly the point that we're looking to illustrate over here. That is exactly what differentiates the plant kingdom from fish, and what gives them the unique quality that we're looking for to identify inside of ourselves. The greatness of the plant is it grows beyond the soil, so it now grows into an environment which is away from its original source. And in the plant kingdom, you get trees. Trees grow higher than 3 tefachim. Remember, halachically, 3 tefachim is still considered part and parcel of the ground. You get things that grow beyond 10 tefachim, which is already outside of the realm of what is called a Rishus Harabim, a public domain, into the realm of a different domain. In fact, you get certain trees that grow extremely high. And yet, in spite of that incredible greatness, the tree, the plant, the flower, is always linked to its source through its roots, which in turn allow it to be connected to the nutrients that allow it to grow in the ground. Different to the fish. The fish has to be inside the environment. The chiddush of the plant is that it emerges from its environment and is still linked to its environment. Furthermore, the dogim, plus, there's no such concept as a fish having its particular root system that it links to in order to get its nutrition and life. Whereas fish can move great distances. We know the migration, for example, of whales. And certain fish can even go from salt water to fresh water, from the sea into rivers and back and forth. That doesn't happen with plants. The plant has to be linked into its particular piece of soil, and very often has to have the correct soil, which has the correct nutrients in it in order for it to survive. So there's a very great distinction between plants and fish in this particular regard, and it's this aspect of the plant, the ability to grow tall and yet still be anchored in and fed by its original source, that we're aligning with ourselves. Now, everything we've described over here about the link of plants into their original source is accentuated even further when we're talking about trees of the field, which is ki ha'adam eitz hasadeh, right? We didn't say that the human being is like tzomech generally, but specifically a tree of the field. What's unique about the tree of the field? Because tzmachim acherim, other types of plant forms, could go into pri ha'adam like grains or vegetables. They do not survive through the seasons. They have their season, then they die, and you have to replant. They completely lose their existence between seasons. Whereas trees, even though they only produce fruit seasonally, the trees survive all the various seasons and they don't disappear. And in fact, certain fruits, for example, the fruit itself survives all the various seasons. So that shows this incredible staying power, this incredible sustainability. The fact that they can survive through the year, all the various seasons, tells us to what extent the tree is so entrenched in its source of life. And which empowers them with this incredible resilience, not to be affected, not to be undermined by the various seasonal changes, and to stay the course, and in fact to grow through what for other types of produce might actually be devastating. For them, it's still part of their growth and development. Now, as we well know, the human being is a microcosm, so you can have the whole universe expressed within the experience of the human. And just as the broad world is divided into four life forms, the inanimate, the plant kingdom, animals, and humans, the human being also has four components which are similar to these four life forms, and even in the spiritual makeup of the human being. In various places in Chassidus, we explain that our personal character is what corresponds to the plant kingdom within the human experience. Because the primary growth of midos is maturing, that they go from small, immature midos, and hopefully over the course of time we learn how they should become more sublime and more mature midos. So the entire purpose of midos is to grow and improve, like the tree that gets bigger. So let's just compare for a moment the difference between midos and intellect. Intellect doesn't just grow and mature. It also has the ability, the freedom like animals have, which means just like animals can migrate from one place to another, even into an environment that is completely foreign to them. Right? An animal that can travel from place to place, the mind can do the same. That's why the human intellect is not bonded to a particular kind of human nature. Because the entire purpose of seichel is to explore, to investigate, to study, to research, to be able to understand things. And the whole purpose of intellect is not to understand things the way I would like them to be, but to understand things the way that they are. That's why seichel moves. Sometimes seichel goes down the route of chesed, and sometimes the route of gevura. Now, the midah of chesed doesn't become the midah of gevura, but the intellect of chesed can swap out for the intellect of gevura. In a certain circumstance, a human mind comes to the conclusion that the correct way to behave is in a chesed channel, and in a different topic, the appropriate way is the gvura channel. In other words, the mind has this flexibility to be able to move and to accommodate very different perspectives, which midos don't. Whereas the nature of midos, our characteristics, is they are what they are, at least according to their natural makeup. Midas chesed will always be chesed in its natural form. And likewise gevura. It's just that I mature, and so instead of getting all excited about some cheap toy, eventually I get to be excited about the Eibishter. And instead of getting worked up and angry because I didn't get my way, I didn't get the second scoop of ice cream, eventually I get to the point where I have this understanding that kind of behavior is completely intolerable, and therefore I would never do it. Now that we've identified what the plant kingdom reflects inside the human experience, which is midos, and we know that the key selling point, the uniqueness of tzomech, is that it has this constant link to the source of its life, that will give us a new insight into the greatness, firstly, of our midos, and secondly, why that is the main arena of our spiritual development. We're about to discover that our midos have a certain advantage, even over intellect, with all its greatness and its objectivity and its ability to see things from different perspectives. Because what is unique about the midos is that they are always consistently linked to their source, which is the deeper part of my neshama. Which is one of the reasons why, when you're dealing with midos, which very often spill over into outward emotions, you see that there's a tremendous strength. When a person has love, it's very powerful. When a person is afraid of something, it's very powerful. It's very difficult to get them to shift. So let's say when a person has a very deep love and connection to an individual, it's very difficult to get the person to move away, even if it's an unhealthy relationship. Just like it's not so easy to move a tree from one place to the other and expect it to still grow. So a person who is wired to be benevolent and generous and tolerant is going to have a really difficult time to become somebody who's discerning and self-disciplined, and vice versa. It's really important to remember that nobody is locked into their realities. Every one of us can change, it's just not common to change. But we have to know that a person does have the capacity, using the focus of their mind, to shift their character makeup, the emotional makeup, even to turn things that were negative to become positive. Just like if you have the right equipment and you're willing to put in the right effort, you can take a whole tree and move it to somewhere else and allow it to grow somewhere else, and they'll grow there. In fact, sometimes the tree will do better in a new environment than in its original environment. So in the same way, it is possible for us to change our midas, and we need to know that. It's one of the key teachings of Hasidus. But the natural makeup of midas is they're very powerful and very focused in what they are and not easy to change. Which, by the way, is the reason why seichel is not as limited. As we see, it is very possible for a person intellectually to grasp and appreciate something which is completely contrary to how they live their life or what their nature is. So I can see the value of gevura even if I'm a chesed person. Why is that? Because the seichel is not so obviously linked to the depth of the person's neshama. Therefore, it is more flexible, it's more malleable, it's more open to perspective. Which is similar to the animal kingdom, where the creatures are not locked into their particular point of origin, and they can roam and they can travel. That would explain why the pasuk says that a human being is the tree of the field. In other words, what we're illustrating is, if you want to encapsulate what everything of what a human being is, look at the tree of the field. Because specifically the area of midas, which is represented by the tree, by tzomech, that's where you will see who the person is in the depths of their soul. So you want to know who the person is? Eitz HaSodeh. Look at their midos. That's who they are. That's why the primary arena of spiritual development is not so much in the development of the human mind. In fact, we're told that that's really reserved for the time of Mashiach, when we can totally shift our minds and our intellectual makeup. The primary area of our development is refining and elevating our midos. Not only because that is what we have access to in today's world, but because shifting our midos has an impact on the depths of our neshama. That's why, how does a human being achieve their completion? Specifically through working on their midas. Until you can illustrate it in the words of the pasuk. What is the ultimate state of the person? To have absolute knowledge and awareness of Hashem. When do you have absolute understanding and appreciation of the Eibishter? When it is transformed into something that affects you in the midas. It touches your heart. That's why when the Gemara wants to explain how it is that a human being is called the tree of the field, it uses the example that you only learn from a Talmid Chacham, Hagun, meaning, Pirush Hagun, what does it mean? That is an appropriate or a fitting Talmid Chacham. So now we understand. What tells us that a Talmid Chacham is an appropriate teacher is that they don't live in their heads. They don't just have brilliant intellectual insight. But rather they have intellect that trickles down into and has an impact on their character. Which translates into appropriate behavior, because that's what it's all about, is how we transform our midos, how we refine our midos, which obviously is going to translate into behavior. That's the kind of a Talmid Chacham that we can and should be learning from. Because the whole purpose of humans is the Eitz HaSodeh, is the development of character. Therefore, how do you know who's the appropriate person to be learning Torah from? Eitz HaSodeh, somebody whose intellectual capacity translates into their personal development, and so therefore they are living with a maturing of their character. So that's an analysis of the individual, that the individual has to work in the realm of character development, of refining the midos, because that's really what speaks to the essence of our neshama. You can expand that outwards and say that that actually represents the entire Jewish people, that we're all about Eitz HaSodeh. Because Kol Bnei Yisrael as we well know, the Jewish people as a whole are considered the children of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And the link that we have to Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov is constant. Like Rashi comments on Bilam's prediction or prophecy, where he says, I see them from the top of the mountains. Says Rashi, I look at their point of origin and the beginning of their roots. And I see that they are absolutely strong and firm because they are rooted in their forefathers. So what is the reality of this connection that we have with Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov? Where do you see it? How do you discern it? It's not so much our intellect, because we are nowhere near the intellectual capacity that they had. You see it translated into our midos. Ahava, Yireh, Verachmin, Klolos, Kol HaMidos. We know Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov represent the three major components of midos. Avraham is Chesed, Yitzchak is Gevura, and Yaakov is Rachmin. And it's those midos, or the positive version of those midos and their connection to Hashem, which is what Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov shared with all of us, genetically almost. Which is why that love of Hashem of Avraham Avinu and the fear of Hashem of Yitzchak Avinu and the rachamim and midas ha'emes that Yaakov shows, that's very much what every one of us experiences every single day to some degree. Why is that? Because unlike any other form of transaction, any other form of ownership, what's unique about inheritance is that inheritance speaks to the essence of the person who leaves the inheritance and the essence of their heir. And therefore, the primary inheritance that we were given by Avraham and Yitzchak and Yaakov is not so much intellectual; it's our midos. So, for example, Avraham Avinu is this incredibly highly developed spiritual appreciation of the Eibush, intellectual appreciation, seichel, intellect, which is beyond what you can even conceptualize. We don't get that. So, because a Yerusha, an inheritance, is from the essence of the person, and as we've already described, Midos link much more to the essence of the person than intellect. Therefore, we didn't necessarily get this very elevated intellect that Avraham Avinu had, because we got a Yerusha, which means we got the DNA of Avraham, which is Chesed. So that's what we got. What we inherited from our forefathers was the capacity to develop love of Hashem, fear of Hashem, rachamim, etc. Because as we have already discovered, the nature of midos is that is the part of us that links into the essence of our soul, and the essence of the soul is what is transferred through the process of inheritance. Okay, what does that teach us? One lesson is this. What keeps Jewish people alive in the truest sense is the Torah. That is our real life, not just the fact that we breathe. The way that the Torah defines how Jewish people should live their lives in the majority, and it's most people. Let's be honest. We're not like the fish, which the Alter Rebbe uses as a mashal to represent the neshamas of tzaddikim, who are completely enveloped in their source, completely aware of Hashem at all times. We're not like that. Those are the people who are 24/7 engaged fundamentally in Torah to the extent that we cannot imagine. The truth is, even in our reality, people who sit in yeshivas and koilas the whole day learning Torah are in the minority. Most of us have to go out into the world, like the plant that's got to come out of the ground. And out there in the world, we have a responsibility and a mission to transform this world into the Eibishter's home. That's why the key message we have to remember is we're trees of the field. Like the tree that is always linked to the source of its life, we have to constantly be linked to the source of our life. In other words, first of all, chronologically. Just like the plant was originally a seed in the ground and then it emerged out, we originally spent a period of our lives in yeshivas where we were completely immersed in Torah. So that connection is something we have to feel years, decades down the line. That a person in the here and now should feel that I'm still plugged in to those pristine years that I spent in yeshiva before I had to go out chasing a parnasa. Not to think, nostalgically, once upon a time I had a wonderful period of my life where I was in the cheder, in the yeshiva system, and I remember it nostalgically. The goal and the challenge is to feel now connected to that reality, to the extent that the person right now feels that's what's keeping me alive. Those yeshiva years, those experiences, that time where I was completely immersed in Torah is keeping me alive now. Those are my roots and I'm plugged into them. And on the other hand, those whose lives are dedicated to learning Torah need to know that you cannot live just in the ground as the seed. When a person is learning, that is primarily an intellectual exercise, and we do know that the intellect, as we've illustrated, is not necessarily a guarantee that it will always stay the course, because the nature of intellect is to shift and roam and explore and learn. Who says it's going to always retain that level of connection? But when a person, during the time that they're learning, is conscious that the purpose of learning is to translate the intellectual capital into something that I feel that develops my character and therefore translates into my behavior, that is what carves the words of the Torah into our hearts in a way that can never shift. And then in that case, no matter what life throws at me, I will always be linked and anchored in the source of true life, which is Torah and mitzvahs. So when we're out there in the world, we need to feel a tangible connection to the days that we were completely immersed in Torah learning without distraction. When we're learning Torah without distraction, we have to be conscious of the fact that that has to translate into character development and something that's actually going to apply in our lives and not just an intellectual pursuit, because that way we'll be connected to Torah at all times.